Tucson at the University of Arizona.
Okay.
So I will cut to that now.
At the University of Arizona, students are encouraged to download COVID Watch, an app developed on campus that lets them know if they've been exposed to someone who's tested positive for the coronavirus. The app also helps determine the person's risk of getting infected based on that exposure, providing health officials with important information to help tailor their advice in each case. Joyce Schroeder, a molecular and cellular biology professor, is the campus lead working on the app.
The campus itself has the ability now to set the exposure notification levels. And what does that mean? That means that if we want it to be really, really sensitive and pick up the smallest potential exposures, we can set the app so that it's going to notify somebody with the smallest exposures. We can go all the way in the other direction and set it so that it's only notifying people if they're absolutely, no question, heavily exposed to somebody.
Around the country, officials are turning to apps like these to help in the fight against COVID. They are using the technology to figure out when to notify people who've been exposed and what to tell them to do next, says Jeffrey Kahn, director of Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics.
There's a little bit of laboratory of the states happening. So Arizona may do something, Virginia may do something else, and we will learn. Maybe we won't learn everything we need to for this pandemic, but everything we learn in this pandemic will be useful for the next pandemic.
The standard health recommendation now is if you're exposed to the virus, you stay home for 14 days. But Samir Halai, co-founder of COVID Watch, says technology like his app gives health officials the ability to personalize what they tell people to do.
We individualize the quarantine recommendation based on your specific exposure history. What we are also now adding is personalization, where we can look at your specific risk profile, your age, pre-existing conditions, and things like that. Then those are some things we can use to personalize recommendations even further. We need to be more nuanced about what we ask people to do.
The app can work based on a community's specific needs, Halai said. A city with few cases may want to notify and lock down everyone who's been exposed. A city with a major outbreak might not be able to do that and would set the app to notify people most at risk. But the first step, getting people to download the app.
I had privacy questions about it. I wasn't sure how much information am I giving my name, am I knowing exact people who, that person has had contact, stay away from them. I didn't know if that was the energy behind it.
I've read up on it a little bit, and honestly I feel pretty good about it. I don't know. I know there's they've done a lot of stuff, to avoid privacy issues, so I think it sounds pretty legit.
University officials are in a race against the virus, hoping the app will help them to keep people safe and allow the campus to stay open. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
Okay, that was a video about COVID tracing, and I'll hand it over to Rebecca if she has any thoughts. If you have any thoughts, Rebecca, about the app there, I know you're going to tell us a little bit more about COVID tracing in general, so I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. Well, I guess the first thing that caught my attention, or one of the things that caught my attention, was when they mentioned that the development by different states, the different states and different labs are doing different projects, and it's not necessarily a race in a competitive way, but they'll be learning from each other, and some are going to work better than others. That reminded me a little bit of the vaccine process, and one of the things that's a little bit unique about that is that a lot of times research follows the money, and you have a lot of different labs looking at a lot of different things. But in this case with COVID, you had a lot of labs working on the same problem very quickly and trying different techniques, which is how we ended up with two or three very promising vaccines. And it sounds like that's a possibility of what might happen with the apps in the COVID tracing apps research here, which is that with everybody working different routes, we may end up with, instead of taking a number of years to get to one halfway decent app. We might, within a short amount of time, have several really high quality apps. So I think that could be interesting for accelerating the future of being able to contact trace in the first place and address pandemics like that way.
So tell us a little bit about the more personal contact tracing, where people are making phone calls. How does that work?
Yeah, so the purpose of contact tracing, and they mentioned this a little bit, they said that you can adjust the sensitivity of the app. The purpose of contact tracing is to find out who's been exposed, and at different points in the pandemic, we've heard exposure as being within different distances or time periods, within 6 feet for 15 minutes. So as they learn more, they can adjust the questions and they can adjust the definitions of who's been exposed and who's getting the follow-up call. So if they trace people that they consider to be exposed, the hope is that by having them take a week to 2 weeks to quarantine, that'll slow the spread of the disease. So some of those things will kind of change as they go along, as they learn more about the disease and learn more about what exposure is.
I see. Do the contact tracers have any sort of legal authority to talk to people, or is it just sort of this purely voluntary thing? How does that work? Is it just something? Yeah.
From what I can tell currently, there are two sets of contact tracers. There's contact tracers working for the government, and automatically, if my understanding is that anything they would talk about here would be covered by HIPAA. I don't know if HIPAA, I believe, is also binding to private companies. The regulations might be a little bit different. But HIPAA is going to cover most medical information for most contact tracers, commercially or by the government. So that is a pretty locked down, established protection for medical information. There is a geographical information element to contact tracing, because you're not just keeping track of who's been exposed, but you have to know where and when. So I don't know. And someone in the video mentioned privacy concerns. That's an area where I don't know if that information is as regulated.
So I see. Do you know if there are any privacy issues in Arizona that people are concerned about, or actually, as far as privacy in general, do people who are being contacted, do they bring up issues like that, or are contact tracers told to talk about that and deal with that in certain ways?
Absolutely. So I personally took 2 contact tracing courses online to kind of compare them and try to widen what I understood. And one of the issues that they address is how to talk to people about different privacy concerns. Some people want the information of the person who exposed them, and there's training on how to explain why that's not possible, because we're protecting their information. We're protecting the contact information on both sides. So we have to tell someone, you might have been exposed, we can't tell you who it was, and that can be pretty upsetting, but we can say, if as we go through this process, we'll protect your information, your privacy with the same with the same degree that we're protecting that information. There's people who want information we can't give, and then there's people who I don't know, but this is a little bit more applicable for STDs, but there's people who don't want other people to know when they, who they were with when. And then there's the medical information itself, is whether they've been exposed to the disease or not. So there's training for addressing all those different concerns and explaining. Like I might say, you had what we consider to be a mild exposure within 8 days ago, but I can't tell them it was, Tom at the grocery store, and, when you sat and talked for 20 minutes in the coffee section. I can't be that specific. So. Yeah.
So one question I have is what sort of lessons do you think governments are learning from these contact tracing programs so far?
I think one of the most effective examples that I've seen mapped out is South Korea doing contact tracing. They did a very heavy lockdown. They had a very heavy case drop off, and then they had 2 spikes, and they used contact tracing to trace one of them down to a specific person who had been exposed, and then before she got her test results back, she had gone to several big events like church, and they could trace it back to a patient 0 for both of these 2 spikes. They could very selectively isolate those people, and support those people. If you have a smaller amount of people in lockdown, you can give them more help, like if they need you can have more resources available for them if they need childcare or groceries while they're in lockdown, instead of having a whole community shut down without support. So they were able to have less amount of people take 2 weeks off. They were able to give those people more support, and those people did not go expose other people. So when they had the lockdown did the first case drop off, and then when they had the 2 spikes, that second lockdown was much more specific. It was much more minor, and it was much less disruptive to the economy as a whole, to the society as a whole, and then to those people who did have to lock down, they had more support. And then, as far as I know, and I haven't followed up, but those countries that have initiated contact tracing are not having waves, not having sicknesses, fatalities, healthcare shortages, etc. So COVID tracing on its own is very useful, but especially when it's overlapped with other measures like a lockdown plus COVID tracing plus, everybody having sufficient PPE. But it is it's not the only tool, but it's one of the strongest tools to literally reduce the amount of people who are hurt or dying or recovering from this.
I see. So one thing I've noticed too is that there are plenty of instances where app-based, Bluetooth-based COVID tracing programs, they just haven't been as successful as they've hoped. And it mainly has to do with the fact that not enough people are even using the apps in general. And one of the things that's attributed to is very little in the way of advertising budgets. As far as getting the word out about these sorts of apps. Do you have any, feedback on that at all?
Yeah. So you can have the best program ever, and if people don't participate, the saying is you're only as good as your data. So having people participate is really, really important. And it lets, on top of everything else, for a tech situation, the more people participate, the more it can fine-tune any issues that are going on, the faster you're going to have a better app, the faster you're going to have more data. So participation is really huge, and you are right, I haven't seen a lot of promotion of this. It seems like, again, with different programs and different states developing the apps differently, you're splitting the amount of results you can get, but you're also splitting your funding. So instead of having one program and a national budget and being able to put one advertisement out, you have a lot of different people advertising, more quietly advertising a lot of different options, and that's really tricky for promotion. We also haven't really seen an organized response to any part of this pandemic, so I don't know whose role it is to do this, if that makes sense. If the federal government was leading the response, then I would assume they'd also promote the product or promote the app, the COVID tracing app. But we've seen in different states, some states the response is state level, some states in Arizona, a lot of times the response has been city level. So it's hard to know who's responsible for what and who's responsible for developing it, who's responsible for promoting it. It's a lot less clear what people should be doing, and you have leadership at different levels giving different advice. You have someone at the federal government might be saying it's safe to travel, and someone at the state government might be issuing lockdowns, and that makes responding a lot more complicated.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's see here. Yeah, that about does it for this. Do you have any sort of projects you're doing with like border coverage or anything like that? I know you're well versed in that you want to talk about, or what you're interested in.
I think when you're on the border, when you're in Arizona specifically, with with the demographics we have, we're going to have the same vulnerable people, and in this case, there's a. I apologize. I'm starting over.
No.
Ask me the question.
Yeah. So
I'm so sorry.
that's great. You do a lot of coverage of the border, and it's going to be great to talk to you some more about that. But thanks. Yeah. Oh.
For Arizona border coverage, we'll have the COVID angle, so you'll have immigration and COVID problems overlapping.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
That's really cool to see two national issues being addressed in one story.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to happen.
Great. All right. Well, that let's see here. That about does it. Let me see. Actually, there are a few questions here. Let me see here.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Someone said, "What is COVID tracing and why is it important?" So you addressed some of that, but for some of the people that are showing up late, can you just quickly review what that is? Just COVID tracing in general.
Sure. COVID tracing itself is taking people who are known to be exposed. Someone shows up at the hospital, they are tested for COVID, and you know that person has been. You locate everyone that person's been in contact with within the exposure period. So maybe in this case within the last 10 to 14 days, and you can test those people. You can see if they have it also. So it enables medical resources to respond faster to people who are more likely to be sick and stop the pandemic.
Cool. Okay, someone here asked, they said the U.S. could have handled this in April and May. We failed. We've met the enemy, and the enemy is us. So, what do you think about that as far as the response time to COVID and dealing with it?
Knowing what we know now, it's hard to say that that the response could not have been better. It's almost easier to say. I don't. Yeah, that's a tricky. The issues that we've seen with PPE distribution, the issues we've seen with lockdowns, the issues we've seen with leadership, all of that's going to affect tracing as well. Decentralized. Yeah.
All right. Well, that about does it here. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining us. And I definitely would love to talk to you some more soon, especially with your expertise in local Arizona issues. And it'll be really cool to read and hear your reporting on COVID and its relation to border issues. So thank you so much and have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for watching, everyone.